Hey everyone. I wanted to take you on a walkthrough of our core competency worksheet. So, this worksheet is a tool that you can use to create excellent core competencies that will help describe the outcomes of your training program. So, let's take a look. So, right now we're looking at a worksheet for a level one training, but they're all pretty similar. So, over here on the left-hand side, in this first column A, we'll see that we have a column for subject. So basically, we're taking all the content of your training and organizing it into some big categories. And those categories first are practice. So that's what your graduate is able to practice at the end of your training, whether it's asana, meditation, pranayama, mudra, kriya, chanting, you name it. Then we have anatomy, physiology, biomechanics. Then we have yoga history and theory. So that might encompass all of your philosophical texts as well as maybe subtle body theory. And then we have lifestyle and ethics. And then teaching skills. And teaching skills are the big bucket that really covers everything that marks your graduate as a teacher. So that could be cueing, it could be demonstrations, it could be verbal assists, hands-on assists, their ability to sequence, all of the above. And then finally, we have business skills. So what does your teacher need to know, or what can they do to navigate the professional world after they graduate? So then we're going to move on to verb, competency, and criteria. But first, let me talk about these a little bit. So the competency describes what the graduate can do at the end of the training. So it's a great thought experiment to sit back, imagine your graduate on their final day doing their practicum or displaying their knowledge through a written exam and thinking, hey, what really characterizes an excellent graduate from my training? And those are the big picture tasks that we're going to list here. And then criteria describes how well they can do it. So consider, for example, you might say, oh, my graduate can teach all the foundational asana for my program. Awesome. But unless I had criteria, I'm not really defining how well they do it. So the criteria might be something like, oh, well, they can speak logically to the body, cue from the ground up, use direct language, speak to common misalignments. So we start to get just a little bit more specific about what you need to see from your graduates to know that they're really doing this task effectively. So let's take a look at some examples to make it a little bit more clear. So we'll start with practice skills. And so this verb is really just it's like our favorite verbs to use for these kind of competencies. Basically, any learning objective that we make, which is what we're doing, wants to start with a verb and it wants to answer the question, by the end of this program, my graduates will be able to la 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 la. And that really puts us in a framework of describing something that's measurable and something that's really student centered. So with practice, I'll click on the little drop down button here and I have demonstrate, practice, or perform. Great, I'll choose practice. And let's say my competency is that they can practice the foundational postures from the curriculum. Fair enough. But they could practice the foundational postures from the curriculum and they could practice them really badly. So we need to add a few more, a little bit more information in there so that I know that I can give them the thumbs up. So in this case, we'll say with good alignment, risk mitigation, and using props safely and effectively. Awesome. And so that kind of describes the standard to which they need to be able to do this thing. Let's take an example of anatomy, physiology, and biomechanics. So I'm going to choose one of my verbs here. And these verbs, you could add your own verb, but these are really just designed to help you create really good core competencies for this particular subject. So let's say I'm going to describe. And I will say the key muscles that move or stabilize each major joint. Awesome. But again, I need a little bit more information because they could just make up some nonsense stuff and that's not going to do it. So I'll say by describing their role in moving the body in asana correctly or accurately. So then if they're able to do that, then I'll know that, hey, they've got it. Let's take a look at one of the teaching skills, core competencies. And for these, design, I like design. I'm going to keep design. Say they need to be able to design a 1 hour peak post sequence to a hatha and vinyasa class for all levels. So at the end of the program, they should be able to do this. But I need a little bit more information. So I need to say how well. So in my training, wow, they need to include a warm up of component parts. They need to choose appropriate postures and they need to detail appropriate transitions. Now, in your teacher training, it could be different. It could be always putting the standing poses first. It could be always organizing the poses like this. You might have a different system for sequence that, of course, you would put in here. But this is just to give you an idea of how we can use this sheet to start uh, kind of giving a really high but specific bird's eye view on what your graduates are going to be able to do when they graduate from your teacher training. And then finally, over here on the right-hand side, how will you assess this competency? This is a great time, and if you haven't thought about this yet, this is a great time to think about it, to think, okay, for each one of these, how do I know that they're actually able to achieve that? So for the practice, it might be like, okay, I'm going to do a graded skill demonstration. So they'll practice, and I'll actually write some stuff down and give them feedback. Um, for the anatomy, describing their role in moving the body in asana correctly, let's just say I do that orally. I do an oral exam, or maybe I do a written exam. And here for a 1 hour peak pose sequence that includes all these wonderful component parts, well, that's going to be a written submission because I need them to submit me a sequence that I can look at and make sure they can do all the things. So hopefully this gives you a nice bird's eye view of this worksheet, makes it a little less intimidating or a little bit easier to understand. And we really look forward to helping you register your program with AYC.